Hey everybody, welcome to another tutorial. So we're going to continue on with our Chapter 8 deep dive. This one's going to be E8 gliders. I'm going to refer you to two other videos I made. One is on E7 air support and E9 paratroop drops because they both have pieces that are going to play into gliders. Specifically, from the air support one, you're going to have light anti-air definitions, who can fire, who can't, limitations. Excuse me. And in Paradrop, you have what happens if you land off board, because those same rules apply to glider if you should some reason land off board. It's going to be a short video, about a half hour or so let's get into it. First thing to remember about aircraft is the conditions have to be clear. They can be muddy, you can have mist, you can have gust, and you can have snow, but not falling snow, not rain, because if you have any kind of overcast conditions, you cannot use air support. You must also determine what direction the wind is blowing in, because gliders will always land into the wind, even if it's a minimal breeze. So unless the SSR specifies that you're going to have to roll randomly, even if it says no wind at start, you're still going to have to determine a direction for the wind. Now, glider capacity, we're looking at three different kinds represented in the system. We have the German, US, and the British, and they each have increasing portage point capability in that order as well. Now, the German one cannot carry any 5/8 counter, so no vehicles, no guns. The American and British ones can, and they can use that chart from the US Vehicle Note 51, which is basically the LVT4, what it costs for the different vehicles and guns to be carried on their glider. Any guns and support weapons must be dismantled if possible, and any glider contents are kept off board on the Chapter K divider until such time as they're put on in the advancing fire phase. So when you're attacking the glider, you're not attacking the passengers. They only receive, incidental damage from a damage result to the glider, but you're not attacking the contents directly. Regarding the passengers themselves, they do not take pinning test checks. They're not subject to heat of battle or any pin results. And you're effectively helpless until the advancing fire phase when they land. After that, you can move and shoot, but until that point in the advancing fire phase, you suffer the fate of your vehicle. Now, you cannot enter the board concealed on your glider unless you land off board, in which case, because you're approaching from off board, you can come on with a concealment counter, but your units that land successfully on the board will not be concealed. The glider counter itself has two sides, a blue and a green. The blue denotes it's in the air, and the green is on the land. Now, if you look at the blue one, you notice the one that's in the star under the right wing. That indicates that there's light armor on the aircraft, and because all attacks on the glider are done on the IFD table, using the vehicle to kill, you add that +1 to any die roll, which may push it over the vehicle kill number. When it's on the ground, however, it's treated like a size 0 unarmed truck. All right, looking at the avenue of approach. Now, before we get into anything, we have to determine the wind direction. Again, for our circumstances, SSR does not specify, so we must determine which way the wind goes. So we're just going to roll one die, with the one being towards the top. So the wind is blowing towards the southwest. So mark that up here. Now our gliders are always going to land facing into the wind. So again, you do not have to pre-designate your points. You can pick any which way, but as long as you pick a path that's going into the wind, we want to get nice and close to the village, but not too close. Now, tactically, you may think it's probably not a smart move if you already know what's going to happen here. But again, just to show you the what could possibly happen. So in the movement phase, the start of your movement phase, you place down your gliders. You cannot stack them, but they may end up that way depending on randomness. You do not have to pre-designate, unlike the paratroops, and they must face into the wind direction. Now, this means that they must form a hex grain, so the avenue of approach is going to be from the southwest to the northeast, and their approach is going to consist of your initial landing hex and the 5 hexes preceding it. That determines your landing ability and the penalties you may have to pay to that die roll. Now, if you should come too close to the edge, so let's say, for example, this, whatever reason, you can't land up there, and your plane starts here, The way it works is you basically reverse the terrain. So, for example, we have our target hex 1. This would be 1. 1, 2. So this would be 2. And then 3 would be 3. So that, remember, offboard hex, assuming this board doesn't exist, offboard hexes are open ground. So 3 becomes a 3. 4 becomes a grain, as does 5. That's how you calculate it. So when it comes time to land in this hex, you know what the terrain is off board by just taking it in reverse. Now, should your glider actually land off board, again, due to randomness, that's perfectly fine. It can still stay there. Again, it's open ground, so you don't have to worry about any kind of terrain. Your glider would land, your troops would dismount, and then they would be off board and able to approach it. The way it works, if, for example, if we have our contents are going to be a 747 with a dismantled heavy and a 9-1 leader. So if this was example turn 1, your troops would land off board and they would vacate the aircraft later on the advancing fire phase. They cannot advance or move. In the turn 2 movement phase, you'll be able to move 1 hex in the movement phase, but nothing in the advance phase. Turn 3, you'll be able to move 1. Now that you're on the edge of the map board, you can actually advance onto the map board. So if you're located even further back, same thing applies. We start back here on turn 1. This would be turn 2. This would be turn 3. This would be turn 4, and then you could advance on at the end of turn 4. So just because your gliders land off board does not necessarily mean that they're going to be lost. Now, when it comes to the landing die roll, you can see the modifiers there in the top right. Basically, what you look at is the preceding 5 hexes. So for this first aircraft, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have a building on hex 3. So that's going to be a 2-level obstacle. So it's going to be a +2. Because of ground floor and the first level. And then there's a -1 and a -2, so that would cancel out. So there would be no modifier to that. And you need a 1 on the black die in order to land on target. So in this case, the aircraft was really lucky and managed to land on target. So then he gets flipped over. The next guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's all clear. It's a -5 to the black die, so it's going to be automatic. We haven't done crash rolls yet, so we'll do those next. I'm just going to show you how these all come down. Then we go 1, 2. So this is going to be a +1 with a -1. So again, we're going to have a 1 on the black die, which we don't get. We look at the white die. Now 6 means we've overshot. And then we look at the black die, subtract 1 is 3 hexes. So we move 3 hexes forward. 1, 2, 3, which obviously is going to impact potentially your crash die roll because you may move into less desirable terrain than when you started. And then lastly, we'll move this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, this would be a +1. -1, 2, and 3 would bring a net -2. So I need a 3 or less on the black, which I don't get again. I also overshoot and I go 3 hexes. 1, 2, 3, and then I flip them over. All right, and that's basically the way landing works. Now, once they land, we look at our crash. So each plane, as it comes down, has to make a crash die roll. So it's flipped over to the green side. You need a 6 or less on the black dice to determine what you land. And right below that, you can see the consequence of landing in certain types of terrain. So all these planes are landing in clear ground. Grain doesn't count. It's no effect. So they're all going to be automatic, not crashing, because the lowest I can roll is a 6, or the highest I can roll is a 6. However, when it comes to strange things like walls, say, for example, this glider had crested this wall and then landed in this hex, he would have to pay +2 to his landing die roll because he crossed that hex site. So in this particular case, 4 + 2 is 6, so he's still safe. But very easily he could have failed, in which case he would have been damaged. Now, say he had failed, rolling a 5 with a +2 brings it to a 7. So as I said, a 7 is a damaged. If I had rolled a 6, it would bring it up to 8, and then it would be eliminated with all its contents. So be careful, obviously, of the terrain around you. But for our purpose here, let's say we wounded it because it crossed the stone wall. You mark that with a wound counter. And its contents, so for us, we're going to use a 747 with a bazooka. The consequences are the support weapons and guns are malfunctioned. Vehicles become immobile, and squads become personnel become casualty reduced. Now, if, for example, we also had a 9-1 in this mix, we could randomize to see which one got it. So black will be the officer or leader. So the leader is the one that takes a casualty reduction, so he needs a wound die roll, and he's eliminated. Now the squad itself will take a morale check, which they pass. But now they have to take a leader loss morale check because they lost a 9-1, so they need a 6 or less to pass, which they don't, so they're broken. And again, this all happens off board because you don't actually see the contents until the advancing fire phase. Now, it goes without saying, if you land in a blaze or a non-frozen water obstacle, like the canal system here, for example, then you would become eliminated. However, there's an exception to this. Should you have, the pilot of all pilots, and you manage to land, i.e. randomness, you managed to land actually on the bridge, you actually landed on the bridge. You didn't land in the water itself. But that's the only exception to landing in a non-frozen water obstacle. Also, if you land in a minefield, you'll undergo an attack as if you were in an unarmed truck and suffer the appropriate consequences. And then finally, landing in a hex has no effect on anything else in that hex. So if you have enemy troops, if you have enemy guns, none of that's impacted by an aircraft coming down in amongst them. All right, let's sweeten up the pot with some defensive fire options. So we've added some Germans to the mix. What we have is 2 20 long AA guns with an IFE of 4 and a rate of fire of 3. Now, when any gun fires anti-air, it loses 1 to its rate of fire, so that 3 is actually a 2. This one here, I'm going to mark with an AA counter, which means it will not be penalized further. However, this one here, because I failed to mark it with such a counter, will be further losing 1 rate of fire when I put it on. So I just want to demonstrate that. Now, again, these AA counter, which gets applied to the units, is only applied when you change roles. So if I were to fire on the ground level in the preceding turn, and then this turn here, it's now the American turn, and I failed to designate myself as an AA fire, I would have to pay the extra penalty for doing so. If I then, in a subsequent turn, go back to the ground roll, say the gliders are on the ground now and I want to shoot them up, I would have to pay this penalty again to note that I'm transitioning into the ground support role. So again, this AA counter only comes on when you're switching roles between ground and aerial targets. And I've got a 467 with a heavy. And then there's 3 squads that are concealed in various locations, just for shits and giggles. On the right side, we have our contents of our 4 gliders, from top to bottom, left to right. And we're going to walk through defensive fire. So things to remember, first of all, what is light AA? Again, I refer you to my air support video. But essentially, it's any AA gun with an IFE value. So if you have a number in brackets after the caliber, and it says AA, as a designation, then you're able to use that. Infantry manned heavy machine guns and only heavy machine guns, so no mediums or lights. Any heavy class machine gun will suffice. Vehicular AAMG, which again denotes that you must be crew exposed in order to use it unless they have remote fire capability. And then an AA capable MA or coax. AA capable main armament would be like the American half track with the quad 50s, the M16 I think it is, GMC. That would constitute light AA, and those are the only kind of counters that can fire. Heavy AA guns cannot fire at gliders. Now, again, light AA is conducted as each glider attempts to land. So the sequence would be that beginning of the American movement phase, he would put down his 4 gliders in his initial landing hexes, and then as he attempts to land each one, there's an opportunity for defensive fire versus it. You can see what happens if you score under the vehicle kill number or you equal the vehicle kill number. Again, there's a little snippet there at the top of the screen to show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to have 4 firepower anti-air guns firing on the 4 column, and we have a 6 firepower HMG firing on the 6 column. So our vehicle kill number is going to be 5 and 6 respectively. Remember, you're not attacking the glider contents because you actually don't know what those are as a defender. You're just attacking the glider. Should you damage the glider, however, the contents will be taking damage. And we'll get into that as it happens. Regarding evasive action, which happens if you equal the vehicle kill number or if you one greater than that, it only happens because of your light AA fire and no other reason. It constitutes a random direction die roll from your initial landing hex to determine a new landing hex. Now, you only make 1 die roll per landing hex, regardless of the number of attacks. So once you move into a hex, you endure all attacks, and then you make your new random direction die roll. And your hex grain avenue of approach never changes. You're always going to be heading into the wind. Following the resolution of all defensive first fire versus an aerial glider, it then attempts to land in its current hex and has to make a landing die roll, followed by a crash die roll to see if it actually thunders in. So let's walk through that. So we have our 4 gliders, as I said. We're going to move the first one here. It wants to land in his hex, so now I have to decide as a defender, do I want to shoot it, yes or no? I'm going to shoot this guy first. And remember, he's not in the AA role, so I'm going to put him into that role. And as a result, he's going to be losing 1 more rate of fire, so he's going to be actually down to 1. 1 rate of fire. And again, he's 3 hexes away, and aerial range is always doubled. Remember that from your Chapter E rules. Aerial range is always doubled, so 3 hexes is equal to 6. So, for example, if I had it to hit roll, it would be on the 0 to 6 column, etc. So I'm going to be firing on the 4 column, and I need to score a 5 or less. Remember that because it's in the air, the glider gets a +1 to its armor because of the star. So I rolled a 9, which exceeds the rate of fire, obviously, and is way beyond what I need. So this gun is done. Marked with the final fire, and it keeps its AA counter now, so that if I want to transition to the ground roll, I would have to pay that additional -1 rate of fire again. I have to decide now. I have a heavy and I have another gun. Do I want to waste more fire, or do I want it to stay risk it chancing? I'm looking at the modifiers. I'm going to calculate. This is a +2. This is a -1. So it's going to be a +1 to his landing die roll, which means he can't be accurate. So I'm just going to let him go. So now the American has to land, and he has to do just that. So we go back 5 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And at hex number 2, we have a 2-level obstacle. And then we have a -1 for the open ground. So it's going to be a net +1 to this die roll. And again, if the black die has to be a 1 or less to land on target. All right, so so the +1 pushes this over, so it's not going to land on target. We look at the 4, it tells us that it's going to overshoot it, and it's going to go 1 hex. So it's going to overshoot it and go over the wall. Now it's going to do a crash die roll. Crash die roll is done with 1 dice, and we look at the table here, and it tells us the result. We're looking at Stonewall. Stonewall is a +2 to the black die, so it needs to be less than 6 to avoid crashing. So we rolled a 3, +2 is 5, so that's still fine. The glider does not crash, and it pays, it flipped over to the landed side. Now we go glider number 2. Same things, I can choose to fire at it, which I will with my heavy. I'm going to fire on the 6th column against that plane, which again will have a +1. Alright, so I rolled a 6. What I needed was a 6. However, if you add +1, it becomes a 7. Now, again, this is going to lead into an evasive action. The plane, the glider will be undamaged, but it still has to undergo evasive action. So that's just black direction, white distance, like a sniper, 1 for 1. Not too bad. Alright, now because I rolled a 2, I'm still a heavy machine gun, which remember loses all rates of fire when it fires aerial. So it doesn't matter what I roll, I'm always going to lose rate of fire. So I'm done with that gun, and we mark it final fire accordingly. Now the glider can attempt to land, or I can try and shoot it again. I'm going to let it land. So we flip it over, and then we make a landing die roll. Again, 1, 2, 3. We have a +2 building. -2 hexes is a net 0. So now I need a 1 on the black die, and it will be a 1. Which is not. I rolled 6 for 6, which is about as worst as it can get. So 6 is an overshoot, and it's going to go 5 hexes. So in the direction, it overshoots 5 hexes. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our plane got moved all the way out here, and which is great for the German, but it's not good for the American player. However, again, we now do our crash die roll because this is open ground. There's nothing that can affect it. It's going to be an automatic 6 or less, so it lands successfully. Now we move to plane number 3. Again, I'm going to fire this guy here. Hopefully I can maintain rate of fire. Remember, his rate of fire is only down by 1, not the 2 as this guy was, so his rate of fire is actually going to be a 2. So we're going to fire at that plane. And I rolled a 5. I have rate. And I rolled a 5. Again, we add +1, which makes it a 6, which is still going to be evasive action. It would have been better if I rolled a 4 or less, then it would have been damaged or destroyed. But it's evasive action. So again, it's not going to be on target. So black dice is direction, white is distance. We go 1 for 4, which is not too bad either. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this becomes its new initial landing hex. From here, he has to make his landing die roll. So we go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is +2 with a -4 is going to be a -2 on the black dice, which is plenty. So he actually lands in target. Now again, because this is grain does not have any impact on crashing. He'll be able to land successfully because the highest he can roll is a 6 anyways. And then that leaves us our one last plane. Now we still have rate. That's why we're now marked with a final fire counter, so we can fire again. Alright, so I rolled a 4. Now I have exceeded my rate, so I no longer have rate of fire, so I'm done. And 4 + 1, because it's in the air, is a 5. Now 5 is exactly what I needed, which means the plane is damaged and it takes evasive action. So the plane receives a wound counter to denote that it's damaged, and its contents, which are here an 80 747 with a bazooka, undergo some kind of damage. Now any support weapons get malfunctioned. Any vehicles get bogged down. So if it was this vehicle, for example, then it would be bogged down, which means that when you try and unbog, you could end up miring yourself in the vehicle plane. And if you have a gun, guns are malfunctioned as well. And then we have casualty reduction for the passengers. Now we have to randomize which one gets it. So black will be the leader. So the leader suffers a casualty reduction, so which is a wound die roll. And it's a 3, so he's wounded. Now the 747 must take a morale check, which they pass. So the end result is we have a damaged glider, we have a 747, we have a broken bazooka, and a wounded leader. Now, because I have no other anti-air fire, this plane can go... Oh, wait, we got to do the evasive action. So again, because of the result of on the IFT, we do evasive action. So black is direction. And we go 1 for 1. So we're going to slide up to here. Now we have to make our landing die roll. So this is all evading fire. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a wood on 4, so that's going to be -1, +1, but there will be a -3. So that means a net -2 to see if I'm on target. So I roll a 1, and the -2 is -2, so I'm on target. Now I do my crash die roll. So here we look at our modifiers again, and because we are damaged and we're not in our initial landing hex, we have to pay an additional +2. So there's a real chance we could crash our vehicle here. So the glider die roll crash number with a +2. So we just rolled an 8. 8 on the table is going to be a elimination. If I would have rolled a 5, +2 would be a 7. It would be damaged. So I would do a damage result. But because I rolled a 6, we add 2. This wounded glider crashes on impact and is eliminated along with its passengers. Now we're into the defensive fire phase. So all the remaining German units can attempt to fire. We'll start with this guy here. So he can fire on the fore table to the plane. Again, that's not going to be good enough with the wall, and the number that he needs again is a 5. So that misses. Marked with a final fire. We have our friend here. It's going to fire adjacent. 8 on the IFT column is looking at a 7. So I rolled a 6. Now, because it's on the ground, it does not get the extra +1, so that's less than the kill number, which means it's eliminated. So this glider and his contents are gone as well. Finally, I have one back here that could fire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he'll be firing long range on the 2 column, which is a 4 that he needs to get a result. He does not. Now it is the advancing fire phase. So the contents of the aircraft come out. And they could fire. So here we have a 747, which assault fires with a 4 firepower with a +2 because of the grain and the building. So on the fore table with a +2. That's not going to be good enough. And this guy could fire as well. Again, he's firing in long range, so it would be halved twice. And he's way outside his assault fire, so there's no point in him firing. Now it becomes the advance phase, and the units can move off their gliders and move around. So things to remember. Glider contents are placed on board in the hex after all consequences of damage results happen. So again, you're shooting at the glider, not the occupants. However, once they're out in the advancing fire phase, they should reflect all the damage that they received. Passengers assume their own morale, firepower, and leadership. They're no longer subject to damage and elimination should the glider be attacked, except for things like collateral damage, etc. You can fire in the advancing fire phase as a passenger, and in the advanced phase you can move out. Unfortunately for 5A counters, you're stuck in the glider until your next movement phase. Remember, if your vehicle and you're bogged, that you also have to do a bog check to exit the vehicle in your next movement phase. Now, should a glider ever be engaged in close combat, it's considered an immobile and unarmed truck. And then finally, there's some miscellaneous points I should have already covered. Basically, an eliminated glider on the ground becomes an unarmed truck wreck, and it therefore has both TM and LOS hindrance, just like a normal wreck. A grounded glider would constitute an LOS hindrance if you're firing through the hex, not into it, but through it. And any vehicle in a damaged glider becomes bogged. Support weapons and guns become malfunctioned, and any passengers suffer casualty reduction, with the remainder taken in NMC. And there we have gliders. Like I said, fairly short, half-hour or so video. Yeah, if there's any questions on what happened, by all means, comment down below. Give me a thumbs up if you think I earned it, and subscribe to the channel. Next up, we're going to be doing Chapter A tutorial on Cavalry, because Dave and I are going to be doing a Cavalry scenario, and we've never used Cavalry, so it's going to be instructive for the both of us as well, facing that scenario, because both sides have Cavalry. So that's enough for me for this one. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.